agriculture sector in the next decade?
There's another shadow, Mr. Flanagan, please.
Thank you very much. First off, I want to say I find this process very interesting, and it's a great way to hold people to account. And I'm also a member of the Agri Committee, and there is concern within the Agri Committee about levels of spending dropping, and how do we make sure that that doesn't continue to happen. And I suppose the phrase that was used by the Commissioner, that citizens need to trust a policy, I suppose that, well, I don't think that is the core of it, because the money initially comes out of citizens' pockets, whether they be farmers, whether they be doctors, whether they be people in general. It originally comes out of people's pockets, and no more than if you go into a shop, you want to guarantee good money and you monitor that yourself. Obviously, people can't do that when the money goes into the general taxation system, so they rely on us. And for citizens to trust that policy, it's got to make sense. And one thing that doesn't seem to make sense to me is in relation to the error rate, and it's been stated numerous times that on Pillar 1 there's a 2.2% error rate, and on Pillar 2 a 5.3% error rate. The question I have is, if that is the case, and it obviously is the case, why are we simplifying or making Pillar 1 as a priority to simplify before Pillar 2? Because a lot of the problems here are caused by a lack of simplification and a lack of clarity. So if you've got a bigger error rate in Pillar 2, obviously you try and do something about that first. Why isn't the priority given on that? But I think there's been a lot of talk about that, all right, and it is important. Of course it's important. Every last cent is important. But in comparison to a fair distribution of CAP in general, it is minuscule. It's like worrying about a drip in your tap while the river bursts its borders and comes for your children in the garden. I think it's fairly obvious what the priority is. You look at the big thing. And when it comes to citizens' trust in a policy, how can they trust a policy, for example, in Ireland, where 80% of the CAP, which comes out of everybody's pockets, and we're net contributors now, so more of it comes out of our pockets. 80% of that CAP, even after the review, Mr Keolis warned about a fig leaf when it came to convergence. We got a tea leaf in Ireland, and sad to say, now Commissioner Hogan was in government in Ireland when that happened. Now, some people might say, well, you know, that's to encourage people to produce. Well, these 80% of farmers happen to be the farmers that got the 80% of the money. They happen to be the richest 20% of farmers. But did they produce more goods than anyone else? They actually only produced 30%. So if it was about production, which is not meant to be, but if that was the argument, that goes out the window. So in the mid-term review, is there going to be a mid-term review? And in that mid-term review, will there be a real drive to change this? And I know, I hear people at national, state level, they want to change it. But what can the Commission do to make a common agricultural policy common? Because there's nothing common about this system. I tried to introduce it into the competition policy opinion, that it was actually perverting competition as well, which it is. We need something done about this, because it can't be justified. I represent people on farms, I represent people off farms, in towns. And for them to hear, well, this makes sense, that the Queen of the United Kingdom, I said England at an earlier meeting and I got pulled up by Ms Stuart Agnew, but the fact that the Queen in England can get massive payments and someone in England, another farmer in England, can't get virtually anything, or the king of the beef industry in Ireland can get 400,000 or 500,000 a year, you can't stand by that. And eventually this House of Cards is going to collapse, because there's less money around and people are asking questions. So the question I'm asking is, what will be done in the mid-term review to avoid further downward pressure? And the final question, and it was mentioned by the Court of Auditors, that next year we'll be looking at greening and how the money is spent in the 2016 report. Well, I'm wondering what will be done to avert a disaster, as far as I can see, when you start looking at what's happening I know in my country what's happening anyway, a thing called variable greening. And how do you explain to the European citizen who pays this money how one farmer under variable greening could get €330 per hectare and his neighbour could get €10 per hectare? Making the statement that you can do it for €10, well, why can't the other guy do it for €10? And what questions are going to be asked about that? I brought it up at a meeting with DG Agri, and I have to say, the eyes nearly dropped out of one of the people's heads at the meeting when I mentioned I was going to bring it up at the Budget Control Committee. Because how can you justify one person getting 33 times more than his neighbour for doing the same thing? So what's going to be done to stop what I would call perverse practices within member states that we cannot justify here when we go back to the public and tell them how this money is being spent? So, an answer to those questions. Thank you.
Herr Kommissar, nach der Shadows-Runde.
Okay, Commissioner. Well, that's the Shadows had an opportunity to answer questions. Would you like to answer now, before we have another round of questions from the other members of the committee? I think there will be more questions, quite a number of them. If we have as much as half an hour, then we would hopefully have an opportunity to ask more questions. I don't want you necessarily to feel you have to answer at huge lengths, and we need more time for questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Chairman. Mr. Liberatsky asked a question about the error rate and what I'm doing to address the persistently higher error rates, particularly in Pillar 2. And we addressed the issue through some specific actions. Areas with high error rates are identified and reservations are issued. And these have been disclosed in the annual activity report that Mr. Pleva would have presented here some weeks ago. And then Member States put in place action plans to try and address these weaknesses and the causes of the errors. Now, the action plans, in my view, are beginning to produce good results because the error rates have gone down over the last 3 years. We know it's still unreasonably high at 5.3%, but nevertheless they're heading in a better direction. The error rate is above, in rural development, is above the 2%. That would be the materiality threshold. So that is why, in addition to action plans, we have to try and encourage Member States to use less prone tools. Sometimes there's a little bit of gold plating. We think that they should also implement simplified cost options when designing their rural development programmes. So that's some explanation towards what the work that we're doing in terms of reducing the error rate. On the food chain, which is the position of the farmer in the food chain, is a very important issue that you've raised. And we have established this year, in January, an agri-market task force under the chairmanship of Mr. Veerman and his 12 experts, and they have come up with a very excellent report, which I would recommend that you look at. And we have, we are likely to be coming forward with some proposals in 2017 to try and level the playing pitch in relation to the role and the position of producer in the food chain. If 20 member states have to do something themselves at national level on this issue of the role and position of the producer in the food chain, there is a problem. But we don't want to create a different problem by distorting competition. We want to have a level and harmonised set of rules of engagement. And we will be coming before the DG Agri, Mrs. Vestager and I, the Commissioner for Competition, and myself on this issue in February. But equally we'll be looking at how we can bring forward proposals arising from the very large support there seems to be in the Parliament, where you had a recent vote in Strasbourg which was 600 votes to 42 or something in relation to something like that, in relation to action needed to be taken at EU level. So it is a big issue, and I agree with you that we need to do something about it. And we have a menu of options now identified in this agri-market task force which will allow us to do so. Productivity is linked, I suppose, towards incentives, and there was incentives to production in the past, which is now, of course, not possible under WTO rules. So it's more of an area-based system. So whether you farm your land intensively or not, you're going to get the same level of payment, but you take your chances on the market in terms of what you produce. So productivity is increasing, but with new technologies and with the move towards digitisation, I feel that we can do more. But this is going to take time. And I think that we also have to do more in terms of the farm advisory services in each of our member states. We have reduced expenditure in this area, in my view wrongly, and we need to increase expenditure in this area in order to ensure that we organise farmers through producer organisations, through discussion groups, in order to have a strengthening of the contractual relationship that the farmer can have in the marketplace with processors and retailers in order to get a better price and increase their productivity through new technologies as well. Active farmer is a big definition, and this active farmer clause failed to get a realistic outcome in the last reform. The co-legislators decided that they couldn't agree in relation to what the definition of an active farmer. The Commission put forward a positive disposition towards what the definition of an active farmer was, and the outcome of the legislation in 2013 was that a negative list about what an active farmer was not was what was agreed. So we have to have another look at this in the context of the omnibus legislation to have more flexibility for those rules, and this is coming before you in 2017. And this is, I suppose, as I mentioned to a previous question, in answer to a previous question, that we have, it's up to the co-legislators to agree or disagree with the Commission proposal in relation to flat payments, but or area-based payments, but also the capping around those particular beneficiaries and around who should get the money or whether there should be digressivity. As far back as my predecessor's time, Mr. Fischler, the issue of digressivity and modulated payments in relation to farmers is actually on the agenda. But the co-legislators have always rejected this up to now. Perhaps there will be a different mood on the next occasion. I do believe that we need to look at alternatives for young people to go into farming. But as I said earlier, it also is linked in to what national measures can be taken to incentivise the older generation to pass on responsibility and management to our young farmers. And there are various good examples around the European Union where this is the case, whether it is partnerships, long-term leasing, whether it is levels of cooperation between the younger and the young farmer and the young at heart. I am sure that this can be done with national incentives, which are not preventing national governments from taking these actions at the moment. But I feel that I have to do more in terms of the proposals in the next reform to help young farmers even more with better financial instruments. The interpretation of our various policies is often problematic, and this contributes, of course, to the error rate. But we produce guidelines about the implementation of the policy, spend most of 2015 with a specific unit in DG Agri helping regions and member states to implement the CAP reform. And, but I have to say there are some gold plating that takes place on the rural development side in particular, and they also many of our applications run into difficulty on public procurement, and these are being identified by the court as a serious problem in our rural development area, which we need to address. The monitoring of seasonal workers. Now, this is an issue, of course, for member states, is the type of labour legislation that we have that affects your seasonal workers. Maybe you have a specific issue in Poland, but we'd be certainly happy to, if we are responsible for helping in any way we can to clarify or resolve these issues, we'd be glad to do so. But it strikes me that under your labour laws in your member state, that you have issues that can be better addressed towards dealing with the problems of labour standards and labour force standards or migration from Ukraine or wherever. But it's something that you can come back to me if you feel we can be of assistance. Mr. Laviovia, you mentioned the MFF and the future. We're not doing a full mid-term review of the CAP, but as you know, DG Budge are coordinating with all of the committees of the House an omnibus regulation, and you will see that we have a list of issues that are applicable to agriculture which we have submitted for consideration. And the DG Agri will be looking at these issues in a very serious way, amending if appropriate, and it will come before the budget, the full Parliament in due course through the trialogue mechanism and the four sectoral committees that you've established. But the issue about what money we'll have in the future is actually another day's work. And that won't the European Council have to decide all that in due course, but I cannot predict the outcome of that, as you would expect. In terms of added value, I see that the added value that we can give in terms of the CAP is that in terms of tight budgets, we need to show, of course, that the European Union is delivering real tangible results, and more than if the money was spent at national level. And we are, in my view, giving added value by addressing the challenges that agriculture and rural areas have in the marketplace. We're providing a very significant income safety net to people in rural areas. Perhaps national governments could equally do that if they had the sufficient resources. We have 1% of our gross national product is actually the EU budget, but nevertheless we have a fully funded, coordinated budget here in the EU that helps to protect as best we can through an income safety net. We are looking at additional ways in the future through the Agri-Market Task Force report of where we can build on that with mutual funds, with financial instruments, through insurance products, and also to build on income stabilisation tools to reflect market resilience difficulties that farmers have had in recent times. Setting the framework for the single market for agricultural products is very important for the European Union. Tackling the challenges that Member States can face together by stabilising agricultural income, by doing better for the environment and meeting our obligations under our Sustainable Development Goals, climate change, avoiding distortions of competition. These, in my view, are delivering real benefits for society at large. And we are also beginning to see progress in relation to the value added of job creation as well in the European Union arising from our policies. What the position is as well in terms of giving a safety net to people at times of market difficulty, we have €1.5 billion we were able to reallocate to our farming sector in the context of the Russian embargo and also the difficulties from and we were able to do this from certain margins which farmers paid into through the super levy payments, €850 million. So we redistributed that in order to help people at difficult times. So the future of the CAP in terms of jobs and trade and quality products, we are engaging now from January with an impact assessment which will involve a public consultation about the modernisation and the simplification of the CAP. And everybody will have an opportunity to put forward their views to say whether we actually can do more. I believe we can do more with the budget that we have in order to meet a lot of our European Union obligations and duties where we have serious challenges in many other particular areas. But I think that the export figures themselves in September showed that our businesses in agriculture are really turned around, arising from the Russian embargo and arising from the fact that we have got new markets in different parts of the world in order to replace some of the opportunities that we have lost through the Russian embargo. Deputy Flanagan, the reasons for the high rate in Pillar 2 are along the lines I mentioned in my answer, which was it's a more targeted programmed, obviously, allocation of finances. It deals with areas around the environment and climate, but also community-led development initiatives, which have a particular issues about public procurement, which we're quite concerned about. And on a regular basis, unfortunately, we come across these particular problems, and the Court has quite rightly brought these to our attention, and we're working with Member States to see can we do better in order to reduce the error in these areas arising from this specific issue. I mentioned earlier about the capping was proposed by the Commission, rejected by the co-legislators on the last occasion. We will try again and we will see what will happen in the future. It's an area-based payment, and this explains why it's based on land. We don't decide who owns the land, but if you obviously have a larger producer, a larger number of acres or hectares, you're going to get more payments. But there's a cap that we proposed on the last occasion, and this wasn't accepted to co-legislators. Again, these are opportunities that will arise in 2017 in terms of whether you want a flat rate, whether you want a modulated rate, or areas or issues of digressivity or capping. Everybody will get an opportunity to put forward that view. The greening of the Common Agricultural Policy has been quite controversial. Neither the farmers or the NGOs are happy with it. And that's because it's too complex and it's not achieving our environmental objectives in the view of many people. And we are certainly going to, we have to base these views, of course, on evidence. And by March next year, we will have our evidence collated in relation to the ecological focus areas. And also during the course of 2017, you will see where we will be bringing forward further reports to decide whether they are appropriate, the measures that we've taken now, in terms of meeting our environmental objectives or not. But flexibility was agreed in the last reform, Mr Flanagan, on the basis that we cannot have a one-size-fits-all for the whole European Union. There are about four distinct regions, at least three anyway, and therefore if you want to get an agreement on a common policy, you will have to have some flexibility given to member states in order to do things themselves in a more targeted way or in a different way. But we give the menu of options, including small farmers' payments, including redistributive payments, and it's up to the member state ministries to decide whether they want to take up those options or not. But there are, in my view, a lot of options there that member states have not taken up in the past, and perhaps they would consider in the future.
Thank
you very much indeed. Okay, we should continue. Our next colleague is Mr. Sikowski.
Thank you, Chairman. I see here many things that are the same as last time on the hearing with you. There is not any Czech translation. Yeah, okay. But I think that you never respond to the concrete question about the Czech Republic and about some companies, what was mentioned, and about some conflict of interest of some people in the Czech Republic in the agriculture sector. What was mentioned, colleague Zeller, I think last time he mentioned the same question, and you never respond this question. Also, I hope that you will be very concretely, and I will be very happy to hear your answer to this question. I have for you some concretely things what I want to know. Many times, if I am looking to European Court of Auditors reports, they are mentioned that there are many problems with agriculture projects and agriculture dotation, and I saw there that there are many things that are really very bad organized in member state. I would like to ask for the question: how is it possible that if somebody have in digital register 260 hectare and he become the dotation for 267 hectare, how is it possible? We have digital register. This is not example from the Greece where are some problem with this register, but this is problem from another country, and they take more money. And the second question is, I would like to know your response. You are interested about really farming, how the farmers are using the field and how the farmers are working on the field. How is the quality of the work of the producers, etc. Because sometimes I see it that there are many fields with EU dotation, but without any very good work of farmers, and I saw this work in many countries. Thank you very much for your answers.
Die Kollegin Ayala Sender, bitte.
Sí, gracias.
Ayala Sender. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Many topics have already been covered in some detail by my colleagues. But I would still like to ask the Commissioner some more questions myself. I'm interested in knowing more about the situation in a number of countries. It's difficult for us when we have to search for information amongst the documents. Some countries, some of the biggest countries, of course, are affected by.
Ja, danke schön. Ja,
thank you very much. Well, I think we've a lot to learn from farmers. Mr. Flanagan asked for the floor. Go ahead, briefly.
Just a clarification on there. You've said there will be no full mid-term review, and that's disappointing. I'm getting mixed messages when you then say, in relation to flattening, it will arise again in 2017. And Mr. Gerbrandy mentioned then that will be another 5 years. Is that it? There will be no review proper full mid-term review where MEPs will get a chance to put right the wrong that they did the last time and to make flattening more likely. Is this going to be included in some form of mid-term review? Like when you say it will arise in 2017, is this as a build-up to the next package after this one is finished?
Well, Mr Flanagan, if you make a proposal today, it will come into force about 2019. So, if we do it as part of the opportunity you have in 2017 is the omnibus regulation, and that presents a suite of proposals that will go to ComAgri, which can be subject to amendment. So, you have an opportunity there, but it's not in the normal sense of what they would call a fully fledged mid-term review of all aspects of our policies. It's what we are proposing with DG Budget, which covers many other DGs other than agriculture, in addition to agriculture, that we feel are priorities that we can get through in 2017, pending then a full modernisation and simplification of the policy, which we will start to discuss in January 2017. There will be a public consultation from January to April that will allow all stakeholders to have an opportunity to say what they feel is appropriate, but that won't come into effect post-2020. And of course, as you know, better than anybody, Brexit comes into play then in terms of the implications for money and the implications for policy.
Der Berichterstatter zum Abschluss.
And the rapporteur now to wind up.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Commissioner.